الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا وولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول والله إني لأستغفر الله وأتوب إليه في اليوم أكثر من 70 مرة. وعن الأغر بن يسار المزني رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يا أيها الناس توبوا إلى الله واستغفروا فإني أتوب في اليوم 100 مرة أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي رب زدني علما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات المسلمين والمسلمات. ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. اللهم اغفر لنا وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات المسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. Alhamdulillah, these are the first two hadith of the chapter of Tawbah. Last week we discussed few important points we learned from this in hadith number 1 and hadith number 2. The first point we mentioned that it shows us the practice of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His day-to-day, his daily task, his daily practice was to do tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than 70 times, in the other hadith 100 times. The scholars and the muhaddithun have given an answer and many answers why, even though Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam has no sins, he's been forgiven, ma taqaddama min dhanbik wa ma ta'akhkhar, all the sins of the past and the future, he's ma'soom, he's protected, he's infallible. Even then, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 70 to 100 times. This is to show us the practical method and the practical model of the Quran Sharif, and also to educate the ummah that if Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not have any sins, where do we stand? Whereas we are involved and engaged in sins day in, day out. So it is more right for us, and we require it more, that we should do tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala many more times. And also it shows and expresses the humbleness and the humility of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be constantly in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, there are times of the day where a person is not allowed, it is not permissible for him to verbally, physically remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such as when he is relieving himself, when he is in the bathroom. At that time, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he would exit, the first word he would say is ghufranak, that, oh Allah, I seek forgiveness from this moment that I wasn't able to physically and verbally do your dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this would be another reason why Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do tawbah on a daily basis. Like this, we also learn that tawbah and forgiveness is also sought after carrying out a good deed. It is possible that the deed that we did carry out and the amal we did do, it wasn't up to the standard, it wasn't 100% as perfect as you should be. So therefore, after salam, we do astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, seek forgiveness from our shortcomings, from the mistakes and errors that we may have made in the salah, or the focus and the khushu and khudu. There was a deficiency in that. So we seek forgiveness from that. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do tawbah and would seek forgiveness even after doing a good deed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one other lesson that we learn from this hadith number 1 and hadith number 2 is that we should continuously to do tawbah. Why? Because there are many mistakes and many errors we make unknowingly also. Sometimes we do something intentionally and knowingly, and obviously for that we do tawbah and we seek forgiveness. However, at times unknowingly, by mistake, we don't realize, we're not concentrating, our consciousness is not there. We may have done a mistake, we may have done a sin. So the tawbah is also done from that. that I seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the one that I do know, I am aware of, and also from that I am unaware of also. So this is another lesson we learn from this hadith number 1 and hadith number 2. The third lesson that we learn, as Ibn Jawzi rahmatullahi alayhi, he highlighted that before we wear a cloth, we purify and we clean the clothes. So we make sure that the clothes that we are wearing, they are clean and they are purified using any detergents available, and before applying any fragrance. Like this, we should also purify our hearts from the sins and the mistakes that we have made, as every sin that we commit does leave a mark on our heart. It is required for us to cleanse our heart until our soul and our heart becomes qalb salim. It is a condition for our heart to be qalb salim, to be entered into Jannah. So therefore we do tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we purify ourselves, we tazkiyah of ourselves as much as possible, do the struggle and effort as much as possible, then our heart will become clean and purified. Another lesson we learn from this hadith is that doing tawbah and seeking forgiveness is not only the sunnah of our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, also it was the sunnah of every other prophet. We learn from the Surah Nuh, and also in other parts of the Quran, where other anbiya, other prophets, رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا وَإِن لَمْ تَغْفِرْ لَنَا, Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, and many other prophets as well, they did tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for us to do tawbah on a daily basis and continuously is also following the sunnah of the other anbiya as well. One other lesson we learn from this hadith is that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, wallahi, he took the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to strengthen the message that we want to portray by taking the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is permissible. However, there's conditions and there's rulings how often we should take the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we are allowed to take the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another lesson that we learn from this hadith is that praying salah is an amal, doing tilawat of the Quran is an amal, giving something in charity in amal, doing dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an amal, doing tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also an amal. Is also an amal, is also a good deed. So the way we exert efforts and put time behind tilawat of the Quran, time behind our nawafil and our salah, like this we should also take time out to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should also take time out to do istighfar and to do tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is also an amal, is also a good deed. And also we learn from this hadith is the more ma'rifat a person has of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more he will feel that I am at a mistake. The closer you are to a person, the more careful you will be. The more careful a person will be. So the more ma'rifat we have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more connection we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more love we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more careful we will be in our day-to-day life, in our daily life. This is why hadith of Bukhari, Harith bin Suwaid radiallahu anhu, narrates from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. He says that إِنَّ الْمُؤْمِنَ يَرَى ذُنُوبَهُ كَأَنَّهُ قَاعِدٌ تَحْتَ جَبَلٍ. That a person who has iman, a believer, a person who is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a person who has full faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does he regard a sin as? So this hadith explains what a believer should regard and should take a sin as. He says that كَأَنَّهُ قَاعِدٌ تَحْتَ جَبَلٍ. It is as though the person is sitting under a mountain. So the sin is above him. It's like as though he's sitting under a mountain, fearing that this mountain will fall upon him and crush him. So every sin of ours should be considered as though that this is heavy upon us. It is difficult upon us. The person will not just stay underneath the mountain and think, nothing's going to happen. He will move away. He will save himself and protect himself. Like this, a person, a believer, a person who has iman and connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will regard every sin heavy. He will not continue doing that sin. He will not continue staying in that place of sin. Whereas then Nabi sallallahu Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he says that وَإِنَّ الْفَاجِرَ يَرَى ذُنُوبَهُ كَذُبَابٍ مَرَّ عَلَى أَنْفِهِ. And a person who is a fajir, a person who is a wicked person, a person who is a sinful person, he will regard the sin as a fly just passing over his nose. Something very tiny, very small, very little. There's no value, there's no importance to it. It doesn't hurt him, it doesn't come to his mind that this is something big. So it's just like a fly passing over his knows. So this is how a sinful person, this is how a fajir will treat a sin. Whereas a believer will take every sin heavy. So this is what we learn, that when a person has a connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala we will have, the more we will be careful and will consider every sin as heavy upon us, and we will try to refrain from the sin because we know the detrimental effects the sin will have. We are aware of the effect of the sin of this in this world and also in the hereafter. Therefore, we will be very careful. Whereas a sinful person, whereas a fajir person, he will enjoy committing sin and he will continue living in a sinful life, unaware of any responsibilities or any effects, any harms of this. Like this, there are many hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One in Musnad Ahmad, Abdullah Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, again he narrates from Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that إِيَّاكُمْ وَمُحَقَّرَاتِ الذُّنُوبِ إِيَّاكُمْ وَمُحَقَّرَاتِ الذُّنُوبِ فَإِنَّهُنَّ يَجْتَمِعْنَ عَلَى الرَّجُلِ حَتَّى يُهْلِكْنَ. That Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu narrates from Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says that be aware of minor sins. Be aware of minor sins. Verily, they pile upon a person until he is ruined. Verily, a small sin, a minor sin, will continue piling upon a sin, upon a person. Will continue piling upon a person until they ruin him. When a person continues committing minor sin, then that will lead him to commit a major sin. And also, when a person belittles a minor sin, he doesn't regard a minor sin something that he should stay away from, then it is possible that that minor sin could also be regarded as a major sin for that person. So this will continue to happen. A person will continue to committing the minor sin until he is ruined. Again, another hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, and Ghaylan and Anas radiallahu anhu قال, from Anas radiallahu anhu, he says that إنكم لتعملون أعمالا هي أدق في أعينكم من الشعر إن كنا لنعدها على عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من الموبقات. Hazrat Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu, he says that you indulge yourself in evil sins, you commit evil sins, and that are insignificant as a hair in your eyes. A small sin in your eyes is like a hair. It's like a hair. It doesn't have any importance, it doesn't have any value, it doesn't have any weight. Whereas in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we considered them as mortal sins. The minor sins and the small sins that you consider them as small as hair, we used to consider them as mortal sins. قال Abu Abdullah يعني بذلك المهلكات. Abu Abdullah, he says that the meaning of mortal sin is that we used to regard them as destructive vices and destructive sins. That these are the sins that will destruct the person, destroy the person, and will take the person to destruction. Like this, Bilal bin Sa'ad rahmatullahi alayhi, tabi'i, in one kitab, it narrates that he says that لا تنظر إلى صغر الخطيئة, that do not look at the smallest of the sin. Smallness of the sin. He says that do not look at the smallness of the sin. Don't think how big or how small the sin is. ولكن انظر إلى من عصيت, but rather look at the one that you are disobeying. Rather look at the one you are disobeying. That way you will help you to stay away and refrain from sins. These are the few hadith and quotes of our tabi'in of small sins. The lesson that we were understanding and we were trying to understand is that we should try to stay away from every sin possible. Do not belittle any sin. Do not take small sin as a small sin, because this could also lead to destruction as well. And it is extremely important for us in this night today, where it is the 29th of Sha'ban, that we do tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from our previous life, from the previous 11 months that have gone by. We turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in sincere forgiveness, in sincere tawbah. We mention every sin that comes to our mind. We mention every sin that comes to our mind in our dua. The sins of the eyes, the sins of the mouth, the sins of the hand, the sins of the feet, the sins of every part of our body. We remember, we make a mention of that in our dua, and at the same time we do dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask for forgiveness and ask for the tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be able to refrain from those sins from today. If we are able to do that, then what will happen is that inshallah we will enter the month of Ramadan clean, pure, ready to gain the mercies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our hearts will be clean, our hearts will be purified. They will be as like a small child who's just born, who's pure and clean from any mark on the sins and from any sins. So if a person takes this night, a special night, takes the remaining of the day as well, it is possible tomorrow could be the Taraweeh or the next day. Now whenever 1 or 2 days left, we should take time out sincerely that we make up for the mistakes that we have made. Do tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely. And as we mentioned earlier on, that when we do a sincere tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, along with the 3 conditions we have, one of the conditions we have is that if we need to make up for something from the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, salah, zakah, then we should make up for that. It is possible that we may have some salah that we have missed, stop making up for them. It is possible that we may have not completed giving our zakah for the last year. We try to give the zakah as much as possible if the zakah day has come. And also, one other thing that we need to do is that if we have missed any tilawat, the sajda tilawat, the sajda of the tilawat of the Quran. It is possible sometimes that we do tilawat during the day and we think that okay, we'll do the sajda later on and we forget. So it is also important that we also do qada of that as well. So before we enter the month of Ramadan, we are completely clean, we are completely pure, and we are ready to welcome the month of Ramadan in a way that we, from the beginning, from the first moment, we are experiencing and benefiting from the barakat and from the mercies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this month. And we also make plan for the month of Ramadan, how we're going to utilize every moment. One of them is that we've got 1 or 2 days left. Prepare for the month of Ramadan from now. Whatever shopping that we can get done, something that will has long-lasting date, and we need that during the month of Ramadan, we got them items out of the way. Only certain items that we may need to purchase. And also for that, our ulama explain, the Muftaqi Ismail Damat Barakatuh, in one of his khutbah, he says that go at the time where the marketplaces are less busy. So go at the time at the marketplaces where less busy, so you will be able to go to the place and buy and purchase what you need and return back home as much as possible. So the time that you are able to save, use that time for ibadat. So the time that you will be able to save in the month of Ramadan, use that time for the ibadat. Like this, one other recommendation and one amal that we should also bring into our life is the time of iftari. Because during the day, there are times where our du'as are accepted, especially at the time of iftari. Hazrat Mufti Amin Palanpur, when he came, he mentioned that the correct time when we learn from the hadith that the du'as are accepted at the time of iftari is the peak maghrib time, the peak iftari time. Generally, people are busy, ready with the khajur in the hand, that as soon as the adhan begin, they put the khajur in their mouth and they continue, breaking the fast. That's the moment, that's the time where our dua should be made. That's a peak iftari time, that's a peak maghrib time. So we should have that habit that we continue our dua at that moment as well. And inshallah at that time the dua that will be made, it will be accepted. And we learn from the hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives thousands of people at the time of iftar. And at the time, on the last iftar of the Ramadan, the amount of people He has forgiven in the last 28, 29 days, total amount of people are forgiven at the time of iftari on the last iftari. Like this, the total amount of people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives and saves from the fire of Jahannam in the night time. The total amount are also forgiven on the last night of the month of Ramadan also. Therefore, we should use our time during the day at the time of iftari. Another time is Asr to Maghrib time. Asr to Maghrib time is also a barakah time, a blessed time. We should also, as much as possible, do busy ourselves in ibadat, in tilawat, in dua, as much as possible. Now, these are the things that we will, the good deeds that we will put effort behind. However, at the same time, which is very, very important, is that a person has prepared a nice dish. A person has prepared a nice dish, and somebody come and put a drop of poison in it, a drop of blood in it, a drop of urine in it. All the effort that we have done will go to waste. Like this, we will struggle by standing up for 20 rakat Tarawih Salah. We will struggle to keep our fast in the correct manner. We will struggle to read the Quran. We'll do tilawat of the Quran. We'll do nawafil. We'll do all of this. But at the same time, what will happen is that because of our weakness, we need to stop ourselves committing sins. This is the most important thing. Why? Because what's the purpose of fasting? The purpose of fasting is to build the taqwa. And one explanation of taqwa is to be able to abstain from sins. So alhamdulillah, along with our a'mal that we will do, along with our good deeds that we will carry out, it is also important for us to stay away from sins, to refrain from sins as much as possible. And try to take a sin as a sin. So as soon as a sin was to be committed, and because of our weakness, we did commit a sin, immediately, in al-hasanat yudhibna sayyat, turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immediately and do some good deed. Do tawbah, do istighfar with your mouth, put something in charity, do your wuzu, pay 2 rakah salah, immediately do a good deed. That good deed, inshallah, will wipe away the mistake that you did make and the sin that you was committed. And as much as possible, we pray salah. In the same khutbah, the Mufti Taqi Sami Barakatuh, he says, to finish on this point, कि अहादीस से मालूम होता है कि हर एक सजदा पर अल्लाह सुब्हानहू व तआला जन्नत में एक ऐसा दरख्त लगाते हैं कि एक घोड़ सवार उसके साये को 500 साल में जाकर तय करेगा. That we learn from the ahadith that for every sajda, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates for a person in Jannah a tree that a rider, a horse rider, can travel under its shade, and it will take him 500 years for every sajda. Then he says that एक सजदे के बदले में 1,500 नेकियां लिख देते हैं, और इस सजदे के बदले में अल्लाह सुब्हानहू व तआला उसके लिए जन्नत में एक ऐसा महल बनाएंगे जिसके 60,000 दरवाजे होंगे. For every sajda, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create a palace for him which will have 60,000 doors. The one palace will have 60,000 doors, and हर दरवाजे में सुर्ख याकूत से मुज़य्यन एक महल होगा. And at every single door you have where we have the shurak area, I forgot the name. Before entering the house, we have that small room that we make. The reception area, just at the door, we have that where we make out of glass generally. So at every single door, we'll have that area as well, made from expensive pearls and yaqut and diamonds, and that will be made for him for every sajda a person will do. किसी भी रात में कोई सजदा कर ले उसका ये सवाब है. So this is the reward of doing one sajda in the night time. So this is something that inshallah will help us to make the most of the remaining days and time before we have the month of Ramadan, and then inshallah in the month of Ramadan as well. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to practice upon what has been heard and what has been said. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to do tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before the month of Ramadan, so we are ready, we are purified, and we are cleansed from every sin, and we are also prepared for the month of Ramadan to gain maximum benefit. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to practice upon what has been heard and what has been said. Allahumma ameen. Inshallah, in the month of Ramadan, we'll continue after Asr Salah as we did in the last Ramadan. Our tartib will continue after Asr Salah on Mondays, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Subhanallah bihamdihi. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati ma yasifun. Wassalamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Birahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Jazakallah khair.